You know who's coming. He's coming. This is serious. What? Who? Close enough. Folks, this is a rare opportunity. Tonight we have in our presence someone who is an animated figure here in South Florida. He's been in the, I think the Miami Herald. He's been in the Sun Sentinel. There are photos of him doing things that you might question his morality. Someone said yes. Rarely does anyone get an opportunity to witness this man named Tamerlane, the real-life supervillain. I must tell you that we have dimmed the lights for your protection. So please, try not to antagonize him too much, for his statements might scare you. Welcome. Let's give Tamerlane a proud welcome.
Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lured upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bowed with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war has smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasings of a lute. But I am not shaped for such sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass. I that am rudely stamped, and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph. I that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by disassembling nature, deformed, unfinished, set before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I haul by them. Why, I in this weak piping time of peace have no delight to pass away the time, lest to see my own shadow in the sun, and descant upon mine own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover in these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. What the hell was that? Anybody know what that was? That's a little bit of Shakespeare. I shook my spear once and got arrested for it. Well, what was that from Shakespeare exactly? Richard III. You might describe it as an opening monologue. It's really an aside. It's an aside because Richard is speaking to you as I was speaking to you. I'm Tamerlane, real-life supervillain. I'm a counter to the real-life superhero movement. Yes, there's grown men running around in the streets of America dressed in Kevlar, handing out little sandwiches and fresh pairs of socks. And they call themselves real-life superheroes. Well, there I was back in 2011, sitting in my high-back leather chair, stroking my dog. That's not a metaphor. I really have a dog. Suddenly on the news comes a barrage of stories, as the media does, things about the Occupy movement, Anonymous, Arab Spring, and real-life superheroes. And I said to myself, what arrogance to think they could call themselves real-life superheroes. So I set myself upon a task, on a path, to become the best real-life supervillain the world has ever seen. Yeah, baby. And no offense to my predecessor who gave his lecture today, but I ain't cosplaying. Let's get a little smartsy-fartsy, you know. I graduated from FAU with an anthropology degree. Dual degree, social science, and a certificate in ethnic studies. That's right, I'm studying you all now, all you ethnicities. Anywho's, let's get a little smart, shall we? And I guess, who changes the slides around here? This one? Well, let's do it, baby. Hook me up. The early history of supervillains in literature and film by moi. Next slide. Go ahead. So, one of the focuses today is going to be tropes. A literary trope is the use of figurative language via word, phrase, or even image for artistic effect, such as using a figure of speech. The word trope has come to be used for describing commonly recurring literary and rhetorical devices, motifs, cliches, creative words. The best word here is cliches. You know when you've seen a movie and you watch it, you're like, I feel like I've seen that before. Yeah, that happens. Next slide. Let's talk about one of the first supervillains right out of the Bible. And here's a quote from Paradise Lost. How the mighty have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, ye who hath guided nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. And I will sit on the Mount of Assembly. Isaiah 14:12. Oh, we got a little religion tonight. You didn't know that was coming, huh? Repent now. Next slide. Another great villain from the Bible is the serpent. Here we have a painting circa 1800 by William Blake showing Eve and the serpent. Always blame the woman, gentlemen. Always blame her. It works. It just works. I watched my parents do it for decades. Next slide. Cain versus Abel. Well, little bit of murder. Murder. What is that story talking about besides fratricide? I don't know. Maybe think back. I'm an anthropologist, so I'm like, well, maybe this is the time when the Cro-Magnon killed the last Neanderthal. I don't know. It's just an idea. But it's definitely a story of murder. And they say that some wear the mark of Cain and still walk the earth. Next slide. I thought this was a good picture. We're moving out of the Bible. We're going back in time, though, to the age of Shakespeare. One of the best villains who did a lot of asides throughout the play Othello was Iago. Divinity of hell, when devils will the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly show as I do now. What I really like about this slide, though, is that it's the actor Edwin Booth playing Iago. Who's Edwin Booth's brother?
John Wilkes
What'd he do?
killed Abraham Lincoln.
He was the real villain, wasn't he? He shot the president. Ah. Next slide. Shakespeare. Now, I don't have a lot of women's in the slides, partially because my ex-girlfriends waged a lawsuit against me to have them removed. But here we have Lady Macbeth. What I like about this is we have a painting with a depiction of the actual actress who played Lady Macbeth on stage. Not a lot of female villains in here. Next slide. One of my favorite versions of Richard III, played by Ian McKellen, set in a sort of a World War II era fascist dictatorship. So if you have to stomach some Shakespeare, those of you that aren't fans, I recommend this version here, Richard III. Again, I put him in this this narrative, and I open up with Richard III because of his asides, of the villain letting you into his plans. Yeah? Next slide. What do we got here? So I like to not only just look at tropes, but look how Hollywood has really fucked things up. You know, they do it all the time. You know, it's like The Hobbit. The Hobbit could have been one movie. In fact, just watch the cartoon version, really. Peter Jackson's, the whole second film was all made up by him. One doesn't simply add superfluous scenes to Tolkien. Frankenstein. Look at this Frankenstein. He's got like this Fabio-looking thing going on. That ain't Boris Karloff now, right? So read the book. I'm personally working on the play version. I need 2 actors to be Frankenstein the Doctor. If there's any actors in the crowd. Is there a doctor in the house? Is there an actor in the house? No actors. All right. Anyway, take a look at that Frankenstein from 1818. This is one of the earliest illustrations. Next slide. John Devil. John Devil. I'm not going to try to say the French version. Interesting enough, the author here, Paul Fable, he wrote stories that predated Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, and even Bram Stoker's Dracula. Everything's borrowed. There's probably another theme here with the tropes. Things are borrowed. It's okay. And as long as you give credit, it's an homage. If not, it's a ripoff. Next slide. Oh, wait, one more thing to say about this guy. What I like about him is one of the first supervillain plans. Yes, he was going to break Napoleon out of Corsica. How was he going to, is that where he was? Elba, Corsica? One of those islands. Elba, thank you. He was born in Corsica. Right. So he was going to build ironclad ships to break Napoleon out of Elba. Yeah, good supervillain plan. Next slide. Spring Heel Jack. Who does he look like? What character from today? Looks a hell of a lot like Batman, don't you think? Nothing's original, people. But this is a colorful character based on urban legend that there was some sort of man-thing creature that would jump over walls in London. Spring Heel Jack. We could bring him back. By the way, he's in the public domain. You know what that means? There's no copyright issues. That's why you see so many movies and shows about Sherlock Holmes. There's no estate that's going to sue. Public domain, baby. Next slide. Here we have a strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with some early special effects of double exposure. I always find it interesting that the book came out in 1886, the theatrical play version came out in 1887, and Jack the Ripper started killing people in 1888. I don't know. Copycat crime, you know? Next slide. What we got here is, I like this because it's an original illustration of how Dr. Moriarty should look like from the Sherlock Holmes stories. Just another example of just, Hollywood doesn't give a shit about casting, do they? They really don't. Next slide. Wicked Witch of the West, or East, or yeah, West. So here's the movie version, right? But look at the contrast, the original illustrated version. No broom, umbrella, and it looks like we've got some braided pigtails there. Yeah. And a missing eye, too. That's evil. What else is evil? Next slide. One of the earliest depictions of Dracula. That's what I liked about the Gary Oldman depiction. It was more like the original character. Again, if you read the book, the descriptions are always different. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that character's been Hulkified. In the book, he was described as something like short and brutish. There wasn't anything particular about him. There was just something off. But now in the future movies, he's been Hulkified. He's 300, 500 pounds, right? Yeah. Hollywood. Next slide. Nosferatu. This movie actually had to be pulled at one point because it was an illegal use of Bram Stoker's material. Yeah. They were still around to sue in 1922. But look for things that are in the public domain. Make it your own. Next slide. Fantomas. We're going to go to Fantomas later on, but definitely an early supervillain. One of the first literary characters to kill people as a serial killer. So one of your first literary serial killers. We have the domino mask there, the stereotypical mask of a robber or a crook. Next slide. We're going to see him again. Now, this is one of my favorites, Dr. Fu Manchu. This might be one of the first supervillains, hands down, period. Your Ming the Merciless, your character, the Mandarin. Obvious, possibly Ra's al Ghul, whatever the hell his name is. Did I say that right? Batman Freaks? Ra's al Ghul. Anywho's it. What is it? Yeah, I try to say it the Arabic way, you know. It's got that extra A in there. But anyway, next slide, please. Imagine a person, tall, lean, and feline, high-shouldered, with a brow like Shakespeare and a face like Satan. A close-shaven skull and long, magnetic eyes of the true cat green. Invest in him with all the cruel cunning of an entire Eastern race, accumulated in one giant intellect. With all the resources of science, past and present, with all the resources, if you will, of a wealthy government, which, however, has already denied all knowledge of his existence. Imagine that awful being, and you have a mental picture of Dr. Fu Manchu, the Yellow Peril, evil incarnate in one man. We should address the blatant racism there. Apparently, I don't know if you've heard this one before, but Americans got a weird thing against strangers. Yeah. They get really weird with like people that are different than them. So, you know, there was a time when there was a lot of legislation of the American government trying to stop Asian immigration to the United States of America. They'd call them the Yellow Peril. And they would make up all these horrible things about them, as though one particular race is more able to commit crimes and violence and nastiness to others than another race, which is, me as an anthropologist, that's just not true. Equally, all races are assholes. You know? But that was then, this is now. I'm going to build a wall around Funky Buddha, and I'm going to make Boca Raton pay for it. Okay? Next slide. Next. There we go. So here's a little secret. Lex Luthor is actually Superman. WTF? Lex Luthor is really Superman. Now hear me out. You see, Superman, of course, is a complete ripoff. I mean, he's a little bit of Moses. He's a lot of a character known as the Gladiator. Maybe a little bit of John Carter of Mars with that leap in a single bound. You know, Superman couldn't fly at first. He just jumped really high. Yeah. He was like an NBA ball player. Here's the real Superman, the original Superman, probably inspired by Nietzsche's Übermensch, the Overman. So here's a being with a supreme intellect that Siegel and Schuster, the creators of Superman, first came out with before they came out with their bronzed man of steel. Next slide, please. I don't know what it is. Thank God it's that. Well, they couldn't use the character Superman, obviously, when they created the hero from Krypton. So they came up with this other bald, mad scientist doctor with a supreme intellect, and they called him the Ultra-Humanite. You following this? Ubermensch, Superman, Ultra-Humanite, yeah? So here you go, your first super villain from a comic book, 1939's Ultra-Humanite. He is now a giant white orangutan, if you're following the storyline. Next slide. And here we have Luthor. Now, this is not Luthor's first appearance. It's his second appearance. Superman number 10, 1940. In Luthor's first appearance, he appeared with a large mane of red hair. But the artist, when he was doing this particular panel, thought he was drawing the Ultra-Humanite. Well, you've seen one bald mad scientist, you've seen them all. That is how Luthor became bald. Now, of course, with culture and comic books, the writers have to do a a redo on the continuum and give you a reason why the hair is gone. I also like this slide because Luthor is wearing his original purple. Isn't that nice? Purple is evil. Bald is evil. Next slide. And here we got Luthor, first version on film. Again, we're sticking with the mad scientist motif. Who else knows this actor? Because he was in another show. He was in a family show, you old ones. No? It escapes me at the time. No. I'm older than that, my brother. Next slide. Next slide. That's a cool shot of Lex Luthor. Batman's first villain, Dr. Death, another mad scientist with a bald head. Keep in mind, too, facial hair is evil. Next slide. The Joker. Well, here's an important character, right? Nothing original here, though, with the Joker. It took several men to come up with this character. Nothing happens in a void, right? The best way to be creative, in my humble opinion, is not to work alone. It was to work with a group of people. Throw ideas off of one another. It'll work much better. So here we have a character created of several different writers, artists. And let's look at the next slide, shall we? Dun, dun, dun. The Man Who Laughs, 1928. Do you think maybe the creators of Batman the Joker saw this? Do you think he's the inspiration? Sure is. That's the Joker right there. That's the, if you will, the real Joker. Next slide. Red Skull, one of Captain America's first villains. Captain America #1, 1941. Played brilliantly by Hugo Weaving in the last film, right? Or the previous film, I should say, yeah. Captain America Winter Soldier, right? Excellent, excellent villain there. The thing is, you had to create the Red Skull because Captain America can't keep punching Hitler in the face for all eternity. Eventually, he's going to kick Hitler's ass. Next slide. What do we got here? Now, this is what I call, as much as Fu Manchu may be the first supervillain, here is your ultimate, true, pure supervillain. I like to call him an actual mega villain or an uber villain. Dr. Doom, of course. He's in metal, for God's sake. A metal suit. I think I'll wrap myself up. Stan Lee was a fan of the classics. The Three Musketeers encountered the Man in the Iron Mask. So Stan Lee was inspired by many things. So here's your Man in the Iron Mask, Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom wields not just technology as his superpower, but magic. Yeah. Gotta hand it to Doom, man. That's Marvel's #1 villain, if you ask me. And you know what? They've really maligned him in most of the films. See, he hasn't had his. He should just get his own movie, as all supervillains should. Next slide. X-Men with their first villain, Magneto. But are Doom and Magneto really villains? They're fighting for their people. They're heroes to some, villains to others. And isn't that the case today? One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It's all a matter of perception. Next slide. I had to put him in his honorable mention. Spider-Man's the Chameleon. Probably the worst Spider-Man villain of all. I mean, really. His power, he just looks like other people, you know. He's not the Scorpion or Doc Ock or Tarantula or the Lizard or any of those wonderful, the Vulture. He's just the Chameleon. But first amazing Spider-Man villain, #1. Next slide. Count Zoroff, 1932 film, The Most Dangerous Game. You've seen this trope a million times. The Hunger Games is this trope all over again. I'm going to let you go. You got a head start. I'm going to hunt you down. That's the whole movie. But Stan Lee was a fan of the classics. And now, I've never heard anyone say it specifically, but I would say this is the inspiration for Kraven the Hunter, if you're familiar with the Marvel character, which I'm wearing a bit of an homage to tonight. Kraven the Hunter. Most Dangerous Game. I love short stories. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Next slide. The inspiration for the Kingpin. I was so pleased to watch a cartoon recently, and the voice actor was mimicking Sidney Greenstreet's voice. Now, if you don't know this man, please watch Casablanca, considered the best film in American film history. And see if you see the Kingpin. Large, rotund man. Bald as evil. Next slide. Ming the Merciless, a descendant of Fu Manchu, from the original Flash Gordon series starring Buster Crabbe. How about the Max von Sydow version in Flash? Every one of us.
He looks like Darth Vader. Darth Vader looks like you.
Oh, definitely an inspiration for Lord Vader, I'd say. But yeah, Max von Sydow, if he ever became a supervillain, he doesn't have to change his name. Right? Next slide. Todd Slaughter, he was so many villains, he was just cast, it was typecast. But he helped give us that stove-top hat-wearing, elite robber baron look, cane twirler, mustache twirler, Snidely Whiplash, Dick Dastardly, all those cartoon characters. Next slide. Now, you talk about the inspiration for Darth Vader. I think it might be this guy. The Lightning from the Fighting Devil Dogs, 1938. Look at that costume. Look at the way he's even standing. Next slide. Some of your first costume supervillains. We have Fantomas again. A character called, what's this one called? The Hooded Terror. I think that's it, just the Hooded Terror. And the Scorpion. Great looks on those guys, huh? Definitely an inspiration to supervillains to come. Next slide. Well, this brings us to a modern period of villainy. To me, the Bond villains are some of the best villains ever created. With that being said, I don't remember any of the Bond villains from the last few films. I don't. It's disappointing. Me, I'm a little bit of Jaws meets Blofeld myself. Here we have Dr. No. His metal hands, yeah. Nehru jacket, secret underwater base. I mean, come on. He's a villain's villain. Next slide. I had to put Donald Pleasance in here as Blofeld. There he is, again, with the Nehru jacket. Apparently Indians are evil, too. At least their suits are. Actually, that's not even a true Nehru jacket. But stroking that cat in his high back leather chair. I upgraded to a dog. Yeah. Turns out cats really don't give a shit about you. My dog will save me from a grizzly bear, and he weighs 14 pounds. So, it just goes to show you who's your friend in this world, right? Not the cats. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent. Next slide. Yeah. We're in the modern villainy. All you sci-fi geeks out there, we got the Klingons, which were sort of Russian Cossacks in outer space. You know? Oh, man. I thought it was great. They brought all three of the original Klingons to the Deep Space Nine episode. That was just epic to my geeky nerddom. Yeah, the Klingons. Great facial hair, because facial hair is evil. Next slide. Gotta have space Nazis, people. Gotta have space Nazis. Just not a movie, not a Star Wars movie without space Nazis. So here we got Peter Cushing, who, of course, is famous for working with what other actor? British actor. From the Hammer films, he's famous for working with...
Alec Guinness?
Well, no.
Lee? Christopher Lee.
There you go, Eric. Here's a man who knows. Christopher Lee. The two of these guys made movies together. One would play the monster Frankenstein, the other would play the doctor. One would play Van Helsing, the other would play Dracula. So it's great to see Lee in the, what do you call those? The prequels, I guess. It's good to see Lee in the prequels, finally catching up to his brother Cushing here. Next slide. Last but not least in our early history of villainy is Darth Vader, the Black Knight. Yeah, he's the bad guy, but all you people like him. You like him, don't you? You like him. The Black Knight. I guess he's cool, right? Gotta like the guy in the cool duds. I don't know, what is there to say about that? Do you root for the Empire or do you root for the rebels? I root for the rebels, actually. Next and final slide. Is it the final slide? Hardly the end. This picture here is from the article that appeared in the New Times magazine. I contacted Kyle Swenson of the New Times, and I demanded that he interview me. I demanded that he interviewed me and my friend who's our next guest. I demanded that he interview my friend Athena Finger to find out her story about the creation of Batman. But I'm going to save that for another moment. I see Troy waiting in the wings. The other Black Knight.
Good job. How about that, folks? Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, that was actually Wolof in Senegal. Awesome stuff. Folks, I know that there got to be questions. There got to be questions. Questions. Is everybody just mesmerized, hypnotized? You ready to submit? What's going on here? Oh, go ahead. Who's your enemy?
Who's the hero?
My arch nemesis is probably Broward Sheriff's Office.
No wonder they always need to hire people. No wonder they're always hiring.
Here we go with BSO. Uh-oh.
Someone please, another question. Yes.
Why are villains more interesting than heroes?
Why are villains more interesting than heroes?
We're not morally or ethically confined. We can do what we want, and you say to yourself, I want to do that too. But you don't. Do it! Let it free. Inside every one of you is a supervillain just raging to get out. Let them out. Let the world know what's what.
Oh, over here and then there. Oh, uh-oh. Turn off your recorders. What kind of crimes do you commit?
On the advice of my legal representation, I am not allowed to discuss that at this time.
Last question. What was the most evil thing you have done?
Well, there was a time on spring break once, right? And there was these two girls. They were friends. They were really, really close friends. You with me here? I was working security at... I'm not going to tell this story, but... There was a time, though. Anyone here old enough to remember Club Atlantis? Not a one of you. That's how old I am. Club Atlantis used to be the biggest nightclub on Fort Lauderdale Beach. Now it's Rock Bar and Route 66. 60,000 square foot club. And for a couple of years there, not only was I a bouncer, but I was the bouncer manager. So it got to a point where I wouldn't even have to touch a gentleman. I just have to say, you see him over there? Kick his ass. Thank you. That's it. Literally. I'd put my flashlight on somebody and they were being yoked by their jaw. But it was a lot of a good experience there. And one of those experiences with a couple Canadian girls. But that's another story. I'll tell you on a beer.
Wow. All right, folks, let's give it up to Tamerlane. Thank you.